Sometimes the most profound journeys are the ones that bring us full circle in some way. I'm Aislinn Green, and this is Travel Tales by Afar, and in this, our final episode of the season, we hear from author Charmaine Craig. Her second novel, Miss Burma, drew from her family's complex history across Southeast Asia, and she's always felt a pull toward India. But it would take an unexpected connection and the power of old friendships to finally get her there to explore her roots.
This is a story of an unlikely friendship between a president, an ambassador, and a writer. That's me. It's also a story of time and timing and place. And like many stories, it starts with a chance encounter. Midway through the dinner where we first met, my daughter's best friend's mother interrupted me to demand, "Wait, what's your name?" Her name was Superna. She ran a global television network, and for the second time that evening, I introduced myself to her, adding something about how my name, Charmaine, had presented challenges to people all my life. In second grade, for instance, packs of boys routinely chased me while chanting, "Don't squeeze the Charmin." "I know you," Superna interrupted me. And then, after I speculated about the ways we might have crossed paths given her line of work and the fact that, well, our teenage daughters had attended the same school for years, "No, I know you." She proceeded to explain that a third of a century before, when I was 18 and she was 19, I'd come down to Columbia University to visit my then boyfriend, Eric, one of her college friends. Apparently, he'd invited her to join us at a museum where I had ogled a Klimt and he'd had eyes only for me. "You were sweet," Superna said. Clearly, she had the superior memory because I was drawing a blank. "I'm still in touch with him," she went on about our mutual friend. In another cosmic turn of events, Eric, whom Superna had met in Hindi class at Columbia, had recently been nominated to serve as U.S. ambassador to India. Add to this the interesting tidbit that when he and I were BFFs back in high school, before we'd ever started dating, we often hung out in my room where the only map on display was a line drawing of India. In childhood, I'd heard the story of one of my distant relatives arriving in 10th century India to save the life of a local ruler's son. The ruler, or so the legend goes, granted this relative and his descendants indefinite privileges in his territory, near what is now Kochi. Those privileges were etched onto copper plates, eventually housed in the Kochi synagogue constructed by family members in the 15th century. Still, by the time Eric and I would hang out in my room, I sensed that my yearning to know India couldn't be explained merely by family lore or bloodlines. At the dinner, I told Superna that I was also in touch with Eric. But the truth was, he and I had hardly met up more than a handful of times through the decades. I blamed myself for that. Sometime after we'd embarked on a long-distance arrangement as early college-goers, maybe as soon as a few weeks after that forgotten first meeting with Superna, he and I had broken up. And heartbreak had caused me to rebuff his early efforts to reconnect as friends. Then, as far as a return to close friendship went, it had seemed to be too late. Though not according to Superna. "I was born in Delhi," she announced before we parted ways that night. "When Eric becomes ambassador, we're going." By the time Superna texted me to say that she'd booked her ticket to Delhi and suggested I join her, 18 months had passed. Our daughters were now entering their second year in college, and she had stepped down as president of the network. Yet a president, former or not, must lead, and the timing of her trip during the final weeks of my summer break from teaching compelled me to want to follow her. Then there was the kindness that Eric had shown me during the early months of his tenure as ambassador, when he'd visited the Kolkata synagogue where my maternal great-grandfather had once served as rabbi. "Come find your roots," he'd messaged me. In retrospect, I'm not sure if the president or the ambassador exerted more influence over the shape that our trip began to take. Our president set up a group email thread. Eric thought he might be able to travel with us briefly. The question was where. "I know Kolkata is important to Charmaine," he wrote. We need to make this a mission to retrace her family's history in Kochi, Superna countered. Superna's high aptitude for achievement made her determined to accomplish more than just seeing the sights. And as I was learning, she held a sincere interest in unearthing more about my familial history in India, something I touch on in Miss Burma, my second book, and, or so she said, Superna's second favorite novel. She's not one for hyperbole. I've done a little family research, I replied, pushing back, and it seems my 2 living relatives in Kochi are recluses and people avoidant. I wasn't lying, even if similar qualities made me all at once desperate not to have the trip revolve around me. My cousin had told me that those relatives, literally the last 2 Jews of Kochi, would never see me. When I shared this with the group, Eric responded, "Nothing like having a 7-car motorcade show up to knock on your door." Just kidding. Or was he? Time is strange. From a certain vantage point, we 3 were strangers to each other, having spent 35 years almost entirely apart. Yet, from another perspective, we were returning to a point of origin, closing a loop, and that made the impression of our strangeness to each other, not to mention the impression of time's strict linearity, seem less persuasive. It also made it much easier to acquiesce, and so it was decided. Superna and I would join Eric for 3 days.
Kaylee Cuoco and Sam Claflin star in the MGM Plus original series, Vanished. When the man Alice loves disappears on a train to the south of France, every romantic memory becomes evidence. Every intimate detail, a potential threat. She thought she knew everything about him, but she may not even know his real name. 4-part thriller Vanished premieres February 1st on MGM Plus. Finding the truth is a dangerous affair.
In Delhi, we boarded a plane bound for Tiruvananthapuram in Kerala, along the fertile Malabar coast, where Jewish people began to settle as far back perhaps as 2 millennia ago. Fittingly, our first trek there, yes, by 7-car motorcade, was to a museum. Set on the lush grounds of one of India's oldest zoological gardens, the Naipur is rich in archaeologically and regionally significant artifacts. Yet if back in the day, during our first museum visit together, I'd gawked at the work before me, now I joined Superna in observing the direction of Eric's gaze. At every turn, he was greeted by staff and local figures, and at every turn, he shone with presence, openness, heartfelt interest, and goodwill. "He's good at his job," Superna remarked, with her penchant for understatement. We seemed to be seeing our old friend through the eyes of the girls we'd been. Girls who had known him to be kind and capable, yet who hadn't been able to glean how he would make good on that outsized heart and capacity. It felt as though in a single moment, we could see someone we'd once known well in a new light and across time. At Via Maya, located in a modernized Amma Vidu of one of the local Maharaja's wives, the 3 of us started catching up over a sumptuous lunch of local dishes. And my sense of our being with one another as if on 2 planes, past and present, continued into the night, when we stayed up late in a bar overlooking the Arabian Sea, buzzed not on alcohol, we didn't need that intoxicant, but on something that can arise when one travels away from the familiar or toward the forgotten. A gaining of distance on a habitual way of seeing and being. As the waves slurped up against the red cliffs beneath us, we traded stories about our memories and lives. On the one hand, we'd had such different trajectories, mine more insular and materially modest. Yet we'd all had long marriages, we were all parents, we'd all been professional since our graduate school years, and we all shared a sense that bonds between us had obscurely shaped our trajectories. Maybe because I began to see myself through their eyes, past and present, I found myself speaking rawly about my hardship in marriage and my reasons for having stayed in it. reasons that Eric and Superna soberly, tenderly took in before trying to counsel me. And maybe because Eric could see that I was in special need of both insight and blessings, he urged us to follow through on our plans to journey to a sacred spot to the southernmost tip of the country before daybreak. At 4 a.m. the next morning, Superna and I were woken by cyclonic howls of wind and rain. As we staggered up to meet Eric, we found ourselves wading through pools of water encroaching into our room, pools that seemed to be still more evidence of the elusiveness of boundaries between the outer and the inner, the dreaded and the longed for, the remembered and the anticipated. For 2 hours, we drove through darkness and lessening rains toward Kanyakumari, where 3 major bodies of water converge: the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean, and the Arabian Sea. Then, still in relative darkness, we emerged onto waves of people on the craggy shore, all waiting to experience the benediction of sunrise in this place. I hadn't known yet that women often come here to pray to the goddess Kanyakumari, who was to marry Shiva before he failed to appear at their wedding. Nor did I know that the 135-foot statue rising from a pedestal out at sea of the poet Valuvar suggests that love must be built on a foundation of virtue. At the shoreline, Eric greeted the children and mothers around us, while Superna held back as if waiting for something. I heard Eric tell us, or only me, that it was a blessing to wade into the water here at first light. Then the sky above the water began to flush with dawn and sensation, a sort of hook under my ribs, a feeling of being drawn forward, of being compelled, not just toward the unknown, the infinite, but back to my deceased mother and aunties hovering somewhere beyond the horizon. Then a question, coming not quite from my lips but from my soul and addressed to my ancestors and the gods and goddesses I could not name. Help me. Show me the way to rid myself of this pain I've been carrying. In his book, The Order of Time, Carlo Rovelli discusses the relationship between point of view, memory, and reality. He also discusses time in light of change. At a certain point, considering the matter of entropy, he writes of a piece of wood that it does not start to burn on its own. It remains for a long time in a state of low entropy until something opens a door that allows it to pass to a state of higher entropy. This something might, he goes on, be a match to light a flame. The flame is a process that opens a channel through which the wood can pass into a state of higher entropy. Superna says she doesn't do emotion, though you'd never guess that from the gleam in her eyes when, on the next day of our trip, we connected with my reclusive relatives, whom we were never supposed to meet. Keith, the younger of the last 2 Jews of Kochi, who spent time with us at the Paradesi synagogue, where those 10th century copper plates continue to shine. And Queenie, the elder of my relatives, who welcomed us in her home and would pass out of her existence there some 10 months later. Was my decision to pass out of my own long state of low entropy in marriage a decision I'd made by the time I turned from the water I'd waded into in Kanyakumari, an outcome of a channel my friends had opened in me, one that reached as far back as our youth? Was it an outcome of the match they lit when they determined to burn away the distance between my longing to know India and my return to that ancestral homeland? What I know is that Superna and Eric compelled me to see the reality of my present from the perspectives of the youths we'd been. What I know is that my new reality, as someone who could conceive of herself as liberated from her long pain in marriage, began at that moment in Kanyakumari because my friends were standing there on that shore with me.
And that was Charmaine Craig. Charmaine did follow through on that decision she made while wading into the waters at Kanyakumari. She left her marriage and she began a new chapter. Eric wrapped up his term in India in 2025, and the president, the ambassador, and the writer remain in close touch. You can learn more about Charmaine and her work, including her novels Miss Burma and her latest, My Nemesis, at charmainecraig.com. I've included that link in our show notes. Thank you so much for joining this final episode of Travel Tales by Afar's 6th season. We'll be back in 2026 with more stories of journeys that change us. Until then, safe travels. Ready for more travel tales? Visit afar.com/podcast and be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We're at Afar Media. If you enjoyed today's exploration, I hope you'll come back for more great stories. Subscribing makes this very easy. You can find Travel Tales by Afar on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. The podcast is also part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network, so visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like Culture Kids and the Explorers Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate and review the show. It helps us book amazing guests like the one you just heard, and it helps other travelers find it. This has been Travel Tales, a production of Afar Media. The podcast is produced by Aislinn Green and Nikki Galteland. Music composed and produced by Strike Audio. And remember, everyone has a travel tale. What's yours?